Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of a sample application that I built using Vue.js with Ionic. And since we're close to the end of the wait here for the beta version of Ionic framework integrated with the beta version 3 of Vue.js, I'm starting the process of updating a bunch of content that I've created in the past around Vue.js and Ionic. The Ionic CLI is available now that you can use to build starter Vue.js applications based on TypeScript and the latest Vue 3 beta with the Ionic Capacitor, with the Ionic Components integrated. What I've done here is I went way back to the beginning. If you look at this page here, this is one of the first applications I built using Vue.js and Ionic and Capacitor. It's interesting, I looked at this, I started this thing 3 years ago. But basically this is one of my more popular Vue.js Ionic applications. It's got 55 stars, got a bunch of people following it. And the basic concept is that it just uses the Ionic Capacitor plugins to get a camera, take a picture, and then I've also integrated I don't have an image here on this one, I've also integrated another plugin just to show you how you can get two plugins integrated and the page navigation. The other plugin I've integrated is the Geolocation API. I chose those two because they both work in a PWA, and then the project that I've checked in to GitHub, that's public for everyone to access. Also, I've tested it and integrated it into an iOS app and an Android app. So please check out the project to integrate it. So like I said, this is the old project from 3 years ago. And I've now upgraded and I have a new project. It's called Capacitor Vue 3 Ionic 5 app. It is posted on my GitHub repo for you to check out the code. And I will have a blog post on Dev2 up about the same time that this video is out. Once again, please make sure you like and subscribe to this content. Also, in the blog post, I have links to sign up for my newsletter so you can get access to content. And I will start offering paid classes, office hours to provide additional support around Ionic Framework, Vue.js, and React integration. So once again, this new application does pretty much the same thing as the old one. It has a camera page to take a picture. It has another page you can transition to, which will use the Capacitor plugin to get your current location and render your current location. Also, this whole thing is written in TypeScript. So as I said, the way to really get started with this is you can download the latest Ionic CLI. And then with the Ionic CLI, you can easily create a blank application and move forward. So let's dive into the code, because that's really what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to type this thing out for you. The code's already built. We're just going to walk through the code. Okay, so here we are on the application. We'll just start kind of from the top so you can see some things that are new. So one of the first things that you'll notice is that you start up your application differently in Vue than you did in the past. Also, there's none of the plugin stuff that kind of the way it was implemented before. Plugins are implemented a completely different way now in the latest release. You can see here that since we're using the PWA elements, you have to load the PWA elements in. And then what I've done is I wait until after the router's loaded to call the define custom elements on the window. So this is how we make sure we get access to the custom PWA plugins to handle the camera and the location. So that's in the main TS. Now let's take a look at the router. If you take a look at the router file, there's a little extra code you need to add to set up on your create router. But it's the same basic premise as before. You create an array of routes, you provide paths, potential redirects, names, and then the components that are needed. And so this is what my route looks like. I have two paths. I have a home path, a geolocation path. The default path redirects to the home path, and then geolocation. Now let's start to look at the app view. Once again, so here we start to see how these new components are laid out using this kind of composition API structure, where you define a component. So that's that is something new defining the component. But inside, as usual, you list your components that you're utilizing. We're just using the app and the router here. And then up here in the template, I have the Ion app and the Ion router. So that's that. And then here's where it gets interesting. Let's take a look at this home view, because we have a lot. Let's start with geolocation. That's a little bit less complex. You can see kind of how we're utilizing the Ionic components. You have the page, the header, the toolbar. This is all old hat, the way things used to work. Nothing new here. But let's get down here to something that's a little bit different here. Once again, you can see we're utilizing TypeScript, so we have the language tag set here to TypeScript. We've imported all the components. And then we need to use this defined component. So what we're doing is we're wrapping our component in this defined component. We specify the name of our component. We specify the components that we're importing that will be being utilized in this template. And then they now, with Vue 3, they have this setup function. The setup function you're going to start to see everywhere. And the best way to think of it is really it's kind of doing all the setup stuff that you want to do before the application is launched. I mean, before the component gets rendered on the page. So what we're going to do here. And one thing you should notice is that there's no data, there's no method section. All this stuff is handled inside the setup. So if we take a first look, we'll skip this kind of ref here. But what you'll see is we are defining all of our functions that we're using. So I have my getLocation function, which is actually what I'm using to call the plugin to get the location. And then I'm setting this local variable here called location. This location is a ref. And this is how we're utilizing, for lack of a better word, the reactivity. So this value, this location, the way you change the location inside the setup is by setting the value that's associated with the location, and then you're passing a location back to the whole geolocation component, and then I'm passing my getLocation back to the whole geolocation component. Now, the old way that this was done is you wouldn't have a setup. You'd have these functions, which would be in a method section. You'd have a data section where you'd have the location, and then whenever location changed, it would cause it to re-render. What we're doing now is that whenever location is updated here as this reference, it will cause a re-render. And the function getLocation that I'm returning from setup will be accessible inside of your template. So this setup is creating variables and properties and functions that all will get associated with this component, which then you have access to in the template. So you can see up here in my template, I have my getLocation function. You can see up here in my template, I use my location function. My location method. So that's kind of how the new thing works. If we look over here inside of the application and we kind of run it, but for those who know me, you know I love using the dev tools. So if we look in our dev tools, what we can see here is that, let's open this up a bit. Go in here. That's not what I want. Alright, so if we open up our Vue tools here, if I go directly to this component that I'm in, here in my geolocation component, you see how it's returned this function and this location from my setup, and so that allows me to have access to them to utilize them as I need them. So that's what you should keep in mind, because you're going to see this everywhere. You're not going to see the old method of where you have the data section and you have a method section and you have your computed section. You're going to see everything being handled in the setup, and then the methods, the properties and the values that you want will be returned from the setup function to be utilized up inside of your component. So this is our geolocation component. Then now if we go back, let's take a look at the more complex home view. Once again, it's following that exact same pattern as before. We have our template section, which is set up using our tags, same as before. But you can see if we go down in here, as we're importing all our necessary imports, we're importing the components that we want to render. We define the components that we want here inside of my home component. And then once again, we have our setup. So here I'm using this reference. This is creating reactive value for my image URL. The other thing is that inside of setup, you don't have access to this. And so the way you get router, you use this use router function, which will give you access to the router. So as you can see down here for the next page, I can just call the router push to change to switch or change my navigation to a new page. Once again, remember the important thing is you do not have access to this. And then once again, I have another function down here. I looked at this directly from the 3-year-old example. The only difference is I had to count for some types since we're using TypeScript. But so you can see here we have my property image URL, which I need on the other side, or basically I need to utilize in my template, my next button function, my take picture function. And then down here at the bottom, I just return the 3 values that I want, and they become accessible for me to utilize up in my template. So if I scroll back up to my template, you will see that I am utilizing my image URL to actually show the image that I capture from the plugin. I am using my take picture and my next page functions. As for how the plugin works, we import the plugins from for Capacitor. I need the camera result type, camera source, and then the plugin. And then down here we use our camera component, not our camera component, sorry, our camera module. And then down here we call the function camera get photo. Oh, let's remind me later. Down here we call the function camera to get the photo. We set the default properties that we want. We get the value back. And then this is the important thing to note when you're using this reference like this. When you're modifying the reference inside a setup, you have to set the value. So you can't just set it directly like this. As you can see, it's kicking up an error. So you have to actually access the value to set it. These are unwrapped automatically in the template. So you can see up here in the template when I'm using the image URL, I don't have to say image.value. The template knows what it is and it knows how to unwrap it appropriately. And then that's pretty much it. I mean, as I said, the important changes that you need to really recognize is this new defined component format. So as you can see, all of them, we have this defined component. This is all old hat, but this use of the setup and the use of the references is really what the new thing is. Let's take a picture. Let's take a picture right now. This is me chatting to you all. Let's take my picture. We see we have a copy of the picture done. And, you know, there it is. I'm going to do another video after this, another blog post where I'm going to once again integrate another Vue.js solution that I built and posted later, where I created a Firebase composition API that allowed you to upload, download images and to access database collections. So what I'll do is the next step will be to take this image that we've captured here. We will use the Firebase composition API component that I built previously, and we'll upload the image, and then we'll be able to kind of list the images and bring it back down again. Like I said, this was just the first step to show you the coolness that's finally coming out from Ionic. You can look at both the old project and a new project, so you can compare to see what the differences are. Please make sure you check out my blog post here that's on Dev2, which kind of goes into a little bit more detail on exactly what is done and what I did inside this project. I'm going to read this one more time, and it should be posted about the same time as this video. I do have the link to the original post that I made also in January, which kind of walks through about a bunch of this stuff. But what you're going to find is all of these old Vue.js posts that I made, I'm going to kind of update them to the latest version of Ionic. So please make sure you like and subscribe. Check out the channel often. There'll be a link to a newsletter that I'm going to be pushing out that you can sign up for, so you can know when these things are happening. Once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for stopping by, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.